Asante sana, Minister. That was a great introduction. It set us up nicely for this conversation with Mo Dewji. Now, Mo, it's been a pretty incredible past year in Tanzania, as it has been across the world, I guess. But you've had a change of president, as we've seen. You've been coping with the pandemic like everywhere else, and there was a lot of catching up to do in the middle of last year. Now you seem to have made big progress on that. But the minister, the president, has introduced a number of very important reforms, both on the political front, the liberalization of politics to some extent. I believe we're now heading for talks on a new constitution or a revised constitution. And personally speaking, I'm happy to see the liberalization of the media laws and so on. But I know your area is obviously business, and you've been under big pressure on the business front, the losses because of the pandemic, and now we have the impact of Moscow's war on Ukraine, which is affecting the global economy in all sorts of unexpected and unintended ways, perhaps, but it's obviously extremely important. And of course, you're operating in East Africa against the backdrop of the worst drought in 4 decades. So I wondered if we could start off by you explaining how you as a businessman and the business community in in Tanzania have adapted to what's going on in the region, places like Mozambique and South Africa and so on, but also the bigger picture, how you've adapted to the new government, and what type of relationship you have with the new government.
So I think during the pandemic, basically Tanzania never went under lockdown. So we did not suffer in terms of production or industrial production. Things were normal. People did get sick because we have largely a very youth population. Not many deaths happened, and then we lost our president, and our vice president constitutionally became the president. And she is the only head of state today in Africa, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan. I mean, this has brought a very positive vibe in the country. She's opening up the country for investment. There was a lot of uncertainties in the past, but she has really worked hard. I mean, you come in, you invest, you're protected. If you're making bigger investments, you get incentives. We had problems in terms of expats to come and work in the country. She has fixed that issue. To a certain level, you get corporate tax holidays. But most importantly, you need security. And if you're coming in with big investments, then you can do London arbitration to protect yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So I think President Samia Suluhu has done a fantastic job, and we are hopefully projecting to grow above 5%. And Tanzania is one of the few countries, unlike Malawi, I think it devalued by 25%. There's shortages of dollars in Kenya. But this has been mitigated very well by the president and the central bank governor in Tanzania. Dollar availability has been consistent, but most importantly, the devaluation hasn't happened. And if you really go and see a country in Africa, in the last 6 years, I think the shilling must have devalued only 2% against the US dollar. So the country is in a strong footing. It's very strategically placed, and I want to talk a little bit about the region because you have 7, 8 countries around it, and a very peaceful country. I used to be a member of parliament, and very friendly people. The country is open for tourism. Recently, she did this royal tour. She went and did an opening in the US, and of course, this all makes sense because she keeps on saying you have Sharm el-Sheikh and you have Marrakesh, who have 12, 13, 14 million tourists going every year. And then you have Tanzania, and you have the Serengeti, and the Ngorongoro and Mount Kilimanjaro, and beautiful Zanzibar. and you have 1.5 million people. So you can look at the investment potential opportunity in the hospitality industry, and it's just because we lack beds. But when you talk about the actual tourism, Kenyans have done fantastic in terms of marketing the country. But if you look at, you look at the National Geographic and you see the wildebeest and the zebras migrating, but they migrate from the Serengeti to the Masai Mara. But the Serengeti is 95% and the Masai Mara is only 5%. So it's all happening in Tanzania. So she's doing a fantastic job. So that also mitigates, because you have foreign exchange earnings, mitigates against devaluation. But currently what we are facing as an African continent, I think we're facing big trouble because what's happening in Ukraine. You see grain prices have shot up.
Right.
First we were in COVID, so logistics was a problem. Then freight started going up, petroleum prices have gone up, then grain prices have gone up, edible oil prices have gone up, and then you have taxes that you have to pay in country, and they are cumulative, and that goes up. And then you have 14, 15, landlocked countries where you need to logistically move from the port inwards, and that costs tons of money. So in short, you see, Africa can be distorted. So if you look at the GDP, okay, we're talking about 1.3 billion people, 3 billion plus, so it's $2,500, $2,700 per capita income. But if you were to take away the Egypts and the South Africa and the Morocco and the Algeria and the Tunisia, and you talk about sub-Saharan Africa, you're talking about $1,200, $1,500 a month. Yeah. That's $100, that's 100 quid a month. So how do we unlock the potential of Africa? So I think there's a problem in infrastructure, which many countries are investing heavily in. I think we as a country, Tanzania, with the standard, as the Minister, Her Excellency said, we are going to be producing 2,400 megawatts or 2,300 megawatts from hydro. And that's a $7-8 million project. And then we have we all know rail is the cheapest mode of transport. We're investing tons of money in connecting into Burundi and Rwanda and the DRC. So infrastructure, things are working well. But to unlock, I believe that we need agri.
The contracts for infrastructure, for example, have to be competitive. You say rail is the cheapest form of transport.
Yes.
Apart from bicycles,
yes.
I'm walking.
Yes.
But I'm totally on board with that. But of course, if you look at the next door,
yes.
the rail link between Mombasa and Nairobi, it's one of the most expensive rail links in the world, partly because of the inflation of the contract. It's just not economical. So how do you avoid that sort of problem?
So if you see, actually, it's interesting that if you look at the rail that the Kenyans have built vis-a-vis what we have built, per kilometer, I think we have paid 60 cents to a dollar. So
you've been driven a harder bargain.
And we've been very transparent. There is no tolerance for corruption in Tanzania, which is fantastic. So coming back to my strategy, so we were a commodities trading house, and we trade soft commodities, sugar, rice, and fertilizer, and we export coffee and cocoa and sesame seeds. But then we went into a lot of agro-processing and manufacturing. So we all talk about value addition. So I'm into the edible oils and cooking fats and margarines and soaps. People complain that we export gin cotton. I have a textile mill, so I do ginning, spinning, weaving, processing, mercerizing, right. Dyeing, printing, knitting, and garmenting. And I have probably one of the largest textile mills in Morogoro, in Tanzania, in Africa. I mean, this textile factory produces over 100 million meters of cloth, which is 100,000 kilometers. I mean, you can circle the world twice around with Tanzanian cotton. So it is possible, and we can be competitive as long as power is reasonably competitive. It's highly, capital intensive. So we have good technology. So I believe coming back, agriculture is the way to go. My company, we're looking at investing $2 billion in agri, in corn, in wheat, in edible oils. So we're looking at palm, we're looking at sunflower, we're looking at sugar, and I'm committing about 60-70% of that money in Tanzania.
When you look around and you see the inflation in the price of grain right across the continent, and in fact across Europe too, of course now, do you have any targeted strategies to deal with that? Have you got an agricultural, agribusiness growth strategy to address what appears to be a recurring problem? I mean, I think the UN Secretary General said we're heading for an overall food shortage in the world in the next 5 years unless we do something and ramp up production.
And you know, for Africa, sometimes I get very, very worried, because when you look at per capita income, you're spending, you have $100, and out of which you spend $60-70 for food. And suddenly food prices have doubled and tripled. So basically you can buy half the food with the money that you have. And that's crazy. And I know we have inflation in Europe, but you're not talking about food, So the strategy should be food security. Africa should focus on food security. We should be growing our own food, feeding our own people, and exporting it to the world. That should be the strategy for Africa.
And what do you think the present government in Tanzania is doing along those lines, and what would you like to see them do more of?
No, so if you look currently to curtail the inflation, they starting to give subsidies in fertilizers, because again, that's criminal. I mean, if you go and see fertilizer prices have gone up, people are not using fertilizers, yields are coming down, so they're giving tons of incentives and subsidies. They've given subsidies on the fuel side. So they're taking a hit as a government and the president from the treasury, in taxes, but softening it for the Tanzanian people. And I think that's a great initiative. And also we have corn. I think we produce about 2 million tons of maize. That comes into a little bit of support instead of wheat, so people substitute from wheat to maize. So I think Tanzanian government, under the leadership of our president, is doing a fantastic job in kind of...
Is Tanzania, how near to self-sufficiency in foodstuffs is Tanzania at the moment?
So we're self-sufficient in some food, sugar to a large extent, maize, we even exporters, net exporters, rice, we're net exporters. But in totality, I think we still have 50% of the basket that we're still dependent on, and this is what I want to focus in.
And are you discussing with your fellow business leaders what can be done in terms of the ramp up the production and the logistics and distribution?
Yeah, so you see, this is a long game. You need to have patient capital. Agriculture is not an easy game. Yeah. But I floated it to, it's also impact investing. So I floated it to my friends in the US and here, and people seem positive. So we are going to go in a big way and invest a couple of $1 billion in that agri sector.
Couple of billion dollars.
Yes.
And through what vehicle? I mean, what's the strategy there?
So my idea is that I'm ready to commit maybe 20% of that equity to start with.
20% of the 2 billion.
Yes. And then maybe raise the rest of that money through, again, ADB, Afri-Exim, or you have Norfund, or you have FMO, DG, and then you have pension funds out of the US that are also very interested. When you talk about food security in Africa, I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's not tech, but it's tangible and it's real,
And on the other side of that, of course, is the food trade, the food importers, who have been doing very well until now. How do you feel about that? Should they be taxed a lot more?
For sure. I
mean, what kind of incentives can you get to move people from trading and importing food into the slightly riskier, or much riskier in some cases, venture of actually growing, processing and distributing that food?
So ideally, if you see Tanzania, or if you look at my father, he used to be a trader, and the traders were always the winners. But then the government wanted to industrialize, and you needed to value add. So they came up with a policy where you bring in crude products, you pay 0% tax. If it's semi-refined, it's 10%, and if you bring finished goods, 25%, and now with the EAC saying 35%.
Right.
So this gives a protection and gives an incentive for you to manufacture, value add, employ people, and pay taxes. So I think Africa has woken up in terms of protecting their markets and protecting it from, finished goods. So traders in the long term are always going to be the losers, I believe. And that is why, if you see my business, I have over 42 different manufacturing industries. We compete and corner Unilever, Procter & Gamble. Now I'm competing with Coca-Cola and Pepsi, with the homegrown cola, etc. So I think that's the way, and that's the future.
And I mean, what about the other big natural resources? Tanzania is now a big gas producer. How is that playing out? And if you had a lot of European gas buyers knocking at your door trying to get you to divert some of your gas in their direction because of the shutdown of Russian gas?
So I think, for us it's an advantage. If you see that we've hit about 40 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in the south of Tanzania. So the big boys, the Shell, ExxonMobils, and Equinors are there. And now, we're probably going to have the largest investment ever the country's had. It's $40 billion of an LNG train. Now we'll have to be able to convert the natural gas and liquefy it, and then create a terminal to be able to export. So there is some runway left, but I think this is going to change the whole trajectory of our country.
Really? And your market, your export market, because I know you want to lose quite a lot of it domestically, your export market would be mainly Asia, I guess, across the Indian Ocean.
For sure, Asia and Europe now.
And Europe as well, and they're via the Suez Canal, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question. And in line with the theme today, you've talked about your father starting in trading, and you've run with the ball, as they say in the Premier League. You've now built, on the basis of a trading empire, you've built a manufacturing empire. What are you doing personally and your sort of cohort of business leaders at the moment to bring on the next generation? How are you trying to inspire them to take things further and move to the next stage of manufacturing, processing, sort of economic sovereignty in a way?
So I've joined I signed the Giving Pledge, and it's an initiative by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, pretty much committing 50% of our wealth for philanthropy, and I'm investing tons of money in education. We have the More Scholars program, but we're also focusing on entrepreneurship, capacity building, but interest-free loans, etc., and creating this new breed of entrepreneurs that are young and that are educated, and we skill them. And I think these are going to be the future for Africa.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Mo. Thanks for listening, and I would like to invite the next interviewee. All the best. Cheers. Thanks.